In this module, you'll learn to automate tasks and workflows, integrating apps and systems through a visual platform called Make. We'll first introduce the tool, see what it's capable of doing, and explore the interface in detail. Then we'll explore templates provided by Make itself, helping you get started ASAP. From there, we'll start building out scenarios ourselves and connect different apps together. Then we'll explore a bit more advanced features like data structures and built-in databases to help you get connected. Once you finish this module, you'll be able to automate a plethora of menial tasks, no longer having to spend countless hours or minutes on doing the little things. And so without further ado, let's get automating. Make is a powerful automation platform that enables users to connect apps and automate workflows without any code. It allows you to design, build, and automate everything from simple tasks to more complex ones. They have the Visual Workflow Builder, which is an intuitive interface for creating complex automation scenarios, and they have a whole wide range of apps that you can integrate with, over 1,000 of them. Then you can also map and manipulate your data between the different apps, and they have built-in tools for monitoring the different automations as well. And you can even run each scenario or automation on a schedule or in real time. For a platform as powerful as Make, it's quite affordable for just about anyone. If you pay annually, the core plan goes for $9 per month, $4 per month for the Pro, and then Teams is at $29 per month if you are paying annually. However, if you're going to pay month to month, then the core goes up to $10.59 per month, the Pro $18.82 per month, and then the Teams at $34.12 per month. And of course, you can increase the prices depending on how many operations you are willing to do. Now, the key differences between each, you can examine it on their website below in the more details, but essentially it's just that with the paid plans, you get more maximum file sizes that you can automate, and this depends on whether you're on the core, Pro, or Teams. And you have access to 300 plus API endpoints, so that this access increases as you go up the pricing plan. And of course, you have more capability to customize your team roles and expanded priority scenario execution, which essentially means the way that you execute different actions on your automation setup can be prioritized according to how you want it to be set up. As soon as you log into Make, you're going to be open to the organizational level. So this is where you can access information about the users, your subscriptions, the payments that you did, and this is all something you can access directly on the key home interface. On the left, you have your access a little bit deeper into the teams itself, who are the users for each scenario. And then you have scenarios, which is the main chunk of what Make is. So scenarios are essentially the automations that you're going to build out across the platform. So this is where you're going to be doing a lot of the work, and every other section is sort of dependent on the scenarios that you have. Then you can access the different templates that Make offers itself as well. So Make offers a whole array of different templates that you can get started with. Then you can adjust and modify them according to how well equipped you are in Make itself. Then you have connections. Connections are essentially allowing you to connect with other apps. And right now, Make, as of recording this video, at least, Make is connected with over 1,400 different third-party apps. So these are where you can create these connections with these apps. Webhooks allows you to then send data to Make over the HTTP. So webhooks are essentially creating a URL that you can call from an external app or service. And this kind of links together with your scenarios as well. If you hit more, you have access to more advanced features like keys or data stores. So data stores being essentially a data storage where that's linked up with all your different scenarios, as well as custom apps where if you're building out a custom app, you can link this together with Make so that these automations happen in the back end as well. So these are a little bit more of an advanced feature if you get to understand how to use Make on a deeper level. Then at the far bottom, you have your resource hub where you can learn more about how to use Make properly, as well as your overall settings, which you can then look at your profile and notifications and more. So this is just the key interface of Make. And now we'll get started in learning how to create scenarios. So as noted earlier, in the world of Make, scenarios are essentially just another word of saying automation. So each scenario is composed of specific nodes, which are just steps along to make your automation work. Now, as soon as you go into scenarios on your left-hand menu and you create a new, then you will be welcome to this scenario editor, which you can playfully move around with. And it kind of works similarly to Figma or Miro if you've used that before. But keep in mind, with the free plan, you only can create 2 scenarios, but with the pro plan, any type of pro plan, you can create an unlimited amount of scenarios. Now at the bottom here, you have this little toggle called Run Once, and this is the button you're going to press when you want your scenario to be ran, whether you're testing it or you're near completion. Keep in mind, do not over spam this button, because every time you do run, you're going to create new operations. And depending on the pricing plan that you do have a specific amount of operations that you can actually move forward with. At the bottom here, you can start scheduling your scenarios depending on the time. So you can choose between different points of the day, how many minutes of intervals. With the free plan, I believe you're limited to only 15 minutes, but if you go into pro plan, you can go even more granular to this with about 1 minute. And then you also have your save function, which is when you want to save your scenario that you've created. Let's say you're building something out, but you want to revert back to it tomorrow, make sure to save. Then you have your scenario settings and different settings that you can put, as well as notes that you can write down for other people that might be looking at your scenario builder. You also have this auto align. As your scenarios get bigger, you have this auto align where if you hit it, it'll go straight back to showing the whole scenario out loud. And then you can also explain your flow, which is a nice, neat little function to show how your scenario is going to play out. So you can explain it and you'll see it shows how the scenario is going to be played out. You also have a bunch of tools here called tools for flow control, tools, and text parser. So these are a little bit more advanced and we'll talk about them in another video. But these essentially are just other ways to include additional features within your automation. And then right next to that, you have your favorites. And so the more you begin to add out different modules or nodes, the more that these apps will then be saved into the favorites. And while it's currently on beta as of recording this, they also have an AI feature where you can coordinate and speak with the AI to get more help. So within any given scenario or automation flow that you create on Make, you have these little bubbles or nodes that I like to call them. And in Make, they're called modules. So every module is essentially a step within your automation. Now you can create these by just clicking anywhere on the board and you can create a module like that. Or you can hover over an existing module and add another extending module from there. Or you can go to your trigger event and just right click and add a module like that. Or you can do the same by right clicking anywhere and add a module there. So there are multiple ways to just create a module. I like to just do the double click. It makes it seem a little bit more fun for me. But yeah, that's how you create a module. And if you notice, if I hit an empty module, you'll have an array of different apps that I can integrate with. So Make, as of recording this video, has about 1,400 different apps that it's integrated with. So there should be plenty of things you can connect to, and I doubt there will be anything that you wouldn't be able to find unless it's super niche, right? So Facebook, LinkedIn, emails, and whatnot. Now, when it comes to modules, you can kind of group them into 5 distinct categories. So there are the action types of modules. So these are where you can perform a specific type of action, whether it's adding something, creating something, copying something, removing something, sending something, all right? So that module will take some sort of action. And then you also have search types of modules, which just essentially just searches things or finds information, right? Technically search is a type of action, but you can sort of group this as a separate type of module. And then you have trigger modules, which are like the weather module you see here. So trigger modules usually start at the very beginning of any scenario, and it's the starting point of your entire scenario. And then you have two more other types of modules called iterators and aggregators. And I'll cover them a little bit further in another video, but just briefly speaking about them, iterators are just types of modules that groups items and then that takes a group of items and then splits them up into different sets of information, or what's called bundles. And then aggregators is the opposite to that, where you get multiple bundles of information and then you combine them into one, right? And so just think about it as iterators is splitting them up, aggregators is combining them up. So those are just the 5 different types of modules. It's just worth noting, but I don't think it's super important for you to like memorize this. If you do want to delete a module, you can always right click it, delete the module there. You can also hold down Shift in your keyboard and then select all by just holding down Shift and then using your mouse to drag and then get all of them and move them around. You can also right click, just delete a module anywhere. And when you right click, you can also choose to clone an existing module so that it will replicate the exact same configurations that you have in this module. So there are plenty of things you can sort of do with each module. And when you have a specific app applied to a given module, you'll notice that they'll have their own configurations that you can take a look at. But let's say if I take a look at the weather module, there's only 2 things that I really need to input here. While the Google Sheets one, there are a lot more, right? And this will differ between, even if it's just a Google Sheets one, this may differ between, let's say if I select Google Sheets, let's look at something like, let's say like search rows, right? So this one would look slightly different. If you notice here, this one would look slightly different versus the one that I showed you earlier, which is the add a row Google Sheets and search rows Google Sheet. So I won't be able to explain all the configuration settings for every single module of every single app because it's all different and there's too many to choose from, but it just gives you some idea that the configuration settings are going to be different app by app. But it's relatively self-explanatory when you just sort of read through what each specific cell is referring to, and then you just kind of follow the steps. So yeah, those are modules. And then next, we're going to just be talking about mapping out those modules. Now, earlier, I talked about how in Make, the term bundle refers to a set of data or set of information. Now, when you right-click over a given module, you can see that it says run this module only, run this module only. So if you run this module only, it'll only run this specific module and give you a sets of data that exist from this module. And this will not take any sort of operation points from your account. And so this is just a great way to sort of test to see what kind of data is offered in terms of the inputs and outputs. So let's look at the weather. If I run this module only, it'll run, and I'll be able to see that the input values that I can put in are city as well as location. But the output values are a lot more. So these are all of the different output values that I can pull from this weather data, right? So coordinates, temperature, atmospheric pressure, air humidity, wind, and then within wind, there's speed and wind direction, cloudiness, etc., right? So there's quite a lot of things that I can pull out from the weather data. And so when it comes to mapping different modules together, this essentially just refers to getting information from one module, or for example, the information that I saw in weather, and then getting Make to put this information up here in a different module. So in this case, with this current scenario that I've set up, it's essentially getting the data all from weather app and plugging it into the Google Sheets. So adding a row and plugging that in. And so one cool thing about it, one of the reasons why I explained this is because when you're connecting different data points up from module to module, you'll see that, for example, if I open up this Google Sheets one and I say I want to pull some data from it and I want to include it into the Google Sheets row A, you're going to see that this is where it all shows up, right? So if you remember the output data that I examined under Weather App, this is all of the output data that I can pull, and then I can just select it, right? And I can select multiple if I want to, right? And one little cool neat thing about this is that if you hover over, you're going to see two things. Number one is if you notice, the weather module is pulsating. So when you have a lot of different modules or nodes set up, it can get a little bit confusing about where you're pulling this from, especially if the colors seem relatively similar. And so then at least this way, you know, okay, this Google Sheets is going to be pulling from the weather app, right? And so this is one thing to take note of. The second thing to take note of is when you hover over when you're mapping these different data points together from different apps, and you hover over the different data sets, you can notice that, okay, temperature. Well, let me show that again. Temperature. This is a number type of value. You see the bracket number. So this is a number data set. And the atmospheric pressure is a number data set. Let's look at temperature. This is a number as well. Status. This is a text data set. A description is a text data set. Sunrise is a date data type, right? So this is important to know later when you're filtering information and whatnot. But yeah, this just gives you a better idea when it comes to mapping information, how you can get the initial data types, understanding of what data exists in there, what kind of bundles of data exist in there. So once again, as I repeat, bundles refers to just a set of data or a set of information. Now at this point, you might be somewhat familiar that, okay, I have this module, which is a trigger module, and then I have extra action modules that I want to take. But what is this green thing in the center? So this is what's called a router. A router will essentially take data from one module and pass it over into multiple modules, right? So when you start off with your scenarios on Make, you're going to notice that it's going to often just look like a singular connection, right? If you want this weather app, for example, to be sending data to multiple different touch points, that's where you set up a router. And you can do this by just hovering over the connection point, right-clicking it, and then add a router, like so. Or you can just do this at the bottom by the flow control tools, and then just add a router like so. I usually like to just do the right-click method because it's just a lot faster. Now keep in mind, a router does not take up any operations. What I mean by this is, as I noted at the very start, operations are just how many times you can actually run a scenario. And so this depends on the type of plan that you have. With the free plan, I think you do have about 10,000 operations you can execute. But keep in mind that while 10,000 does sound like a lot, if you're running a specific scenario every 15 minutes or so, that does add up, right? So for example, if I were to run something right now, one action would be the weather. So it's going to scrape the weather data. So that's one action. So that's one operation. And then it'll go through the router and it'll pass it over into this Google Sheets. And this Google Sheets will take whatever action as well. That's two operations. Now, for example, if I were to connect two Google Sheets to the router, then it's going to be 1, 2, and 3. So that's 3 operations. And if I were to do this every 15 minutes daily, this does add up, right? And especially the more complex your scenario is. So just keep in mind the router itself does not actually take any operations, even though it looks like a similar bubble. So that's really when it comes to router. You can also right-click your router and then just order the router routes. So if you have multiple different modules connected, you can order which action should be taken, which modules should execute first, right? And you can order it from there. Now, when it comes to filtering your information, if you see here, one of the modules has something called equal to 20, while the other module has nothing. Sometimes you want to filter the data out where you only want specific data to be passed or restricted within the given flow. So you can then right-click, and then you can just set up a filter. So you can right-click anywhere on the connection line, and then set up a filter. So if you open that up, you have this standard window here, and you have your label. So this is just the title of what you want to put, and then the conditions. So this works similar if you've used Google Sheets or Excel, you're probably familiar, or any real platform that requires filtering. This is essentially that. And so you see here that you can look at the condition and see what kind of data. Let's say if I'm going to pull the sunrise, or let's say the temperature data, all right? And then at this point, you can hit the drop down of the operators, and operators comes in 4 forms. Basic operators, which are just what if it exists or not, right? Does this temperature data exist or does it not exist? And then if it does exist, then pull it there. Then there are things called text operators, which is just essentially referring to if it equals to, not equal to, does not contain. And so it's just does that temperature data contain the word, Fahrenheit, for example, or does it not contain it? So this is based off of text. And then you have numerical operators, which is just if it is a number data, then if the number is greater or equal to 100, then only filter that information out, right? And then you have, of course, date time operators, which is based off of dates. And then you have time operators and so on, right? So these are just some things to take note of when you're filtering your information. For anybody who's worked with Google Sheets, Microsoft Excel, or even some project management tools, I'm sure you're already familiar with what filtering is. Now, keep in mind, when you are choosing your operator, if you remember earlier, I mentioned about if you hover over the given data set, you can data point. You can see where this is coming from, but from the pulsating icon, but also you can see that what kind of data type it is. So temperature is a number data. So in this case, text operators wouldn't really make sense. You would probably have to choose numeric operators and say if this is equal to, and then you can just choose this, and you can just choose a number, right? So in this case, you can just type a number like, if the temperature is equal to 20 degrees, right? And you just press 20, and then you can just press OK, and boom, the filter will have been created. Now keep in mind, because I did not label this, you see that there is no name here, while versus this one, it actually has a name, right? So that's why I think it's important, equal to 20. It's important to put a name. Whoops, but it seems like this one I accidentally put less than 20. So you can see this is why I do recommend always adding those labels, because as your scenarios get more complex and you have many modules being connected together to the router, it's going to get confusing on understanding what is the filter exactly doing. All right, so this is essentially filtering and routing different modules together. So far I explained everything that you need to know about the basics of creating a scenario, setting up routers, filtering information, as well as setting up modules. So I will show you just in this example here about creating a very simple automation when it came to that weather app. So here I have an empty screen. I can set up the weather. We'll start off with the weather app just because it's the most simple to start off with, and I can choose what kind of action I want it to do. So do I want it to get current weather, or do I want to get daily weather forecast? So I can say get current weather, and I will choose the different cities. I can see cities, and I will say perhaps let's say London, UK, just because of the example that I provided. So I can say that, and now it's going to be pulling the weather data for London, UK. Now then from here, I can just add another module. I can say Google Sheets. Let's make it Google Sheets. And let's say I want it to add it into a row. I want to add the data that it gets in from and then put it into a new row, right? So I already have my Gmail connected here, but if you don't have it, it's going to ask you to connect your Gmail together. You can always add more. And then from here, I've connected it. You can skip the search method, go to your drive, which drive do you want it to pull from, and then try to find this specific spreadsheet that you want. So I've already created a spreadsheet called Make Demo, and that would be this one right here. And so I've pulled from this Make Demo spreadsheet, and then I will go into the sheet name because I have created multiple different sheets, and I have said sheet 1, open into sheet 1. Now, if you don't have to have multiple different sheets if you're just doing very simple data pulling. But in this case, I put it into sheet 1, and then the table contains headers. It's okay, no. And here I can say values, right? So in this case, the values for this one would be going into cell A, so row A, right? So this one right here. So then I would say I want to pull the temperature, or let's say I want to pull sunrise data, and then I want to pull temperature as well as information about whether or not it's going to be like wind speed, as well as whether or not it's going to, let's say, description, maybe even add status, right? So I'm just pulling different data types, data points about the weather in, and trying to pull it from the weather app and put it into Google Sheets by adding a row. So a simple automation like this, I would do that. Okay, I would press OK. And now if I were to run this, I'll run this once. You can see the status of how it's being run at the bottom here. And if something did not execute properly, it will tell you. It will usually show up in red, right? So in this case, everything was run completed. And you've noticed that these little bubbles here, so this is what I was referring to earlier about the number of operations that it took. So in this case, it ran once and twice. So there's 2 operations that were pulled. So if I go back to my Google Sheets, you'll notice, boom, earlier there was only 1 row, but now there's 2 rows, right? And just pull that data here, right? And so this is just just to demonstrate to you a very simple automation. Now, if I were to expand that and go, let's now add a router, because I want to pull multiple types of information, and I want to create another module, and I want to add this. I want to add another row, connect automatically. Oops, I connected the wrong one. Unlink this. I want to connect it to this router instead. And so you'll notice this little red bubble here. And so the value must not be empty. So what I could do is I could pull this and I could tell it. The reason for this is because it hasn't been able to identify what sheet it's going to be pulling from, because I created a new one entirely. So I would then just find the spreadsheet from my drive to make demo one, the sheet name. And if you notice, this is why I created multiple sheets, because instead of putting the information into sheet 1, because that's what this first module is going to do, I'm going to put this into sheet 2 instead. And then so this is above 20 degrees. And so in this case, I'll just make the value, temperature, and let's say status, description, wind speed. This one will just be that one. I will press OK. Now, I will have that, and if I run this, it's going to be how many operations do you think it's going to be pulling? It's going to be pulling 1, 2, and 3. Right, so you can see 1, 2, and 3. And once again, before you run it, you can get it to explain the flow. So once again, it's going to explain the flow. It's going to first go to the router, then pull it to Google Sheets, and then pull it to the second Google Sheets. So then if I press run, the scenario run was completed, and we'll see how it showed. So it showed up, created another third row. Let's say if it pulled on above 20, now it pulled another one as well. Right, so you can see that it's how the automation flow that I've created, where I'm getting whatever data from the weather app and getting the data to be pulled into, be put into 2 different sheets of a Google spreadsheet. And this is where, if I want, I can also turn off, disable a given route, right? So that moving forward, if I explain this flow, it should go into the Google Sheets, but if I disable this route, when I actually run it, it will not actually pull this. It will not actually send this data into the Google Sheets because I've disabled the route for now. You can always enable it. And then if I want to, from there, set up a filter so that I still call this above 5. Let's call this above 5. And I make it so that if the temperature is, above 5. And then if the temperature data was a numerical value, so if the temperature is less than, we'll call it less than 5. We'll call it less than 5. If the temperature is less than 5, then it will only pull data when it's less than 5. So if I press OK, now you can see the filter. I run this, and you see here, this operation pulled, but this operation didn't pull. And if I look here, they added a new data point, but they didn't add a new row here. And why is that? Because currently the temperature is at 6.35. So because the filter that I put was that only bring in the information when it's less than 5. So then that's the only time it's going to pull. It's going to pull in any data, any temperature set that is less than 5, right? But because the current temperature shown in London, UK is 6.35, that's why it didn't send any data there. So this is the important things about filtering. And just to take that a little bit step further, if I want to go back to the filter, right? Whoops. Let's say if I go to filter, you'll notice this add and rule or add or rule. This just essentially refers to if you want to expand your filters by saying, okay, this is going to be more than this. This is going to be, the temperature is going to be equal to 6, and then you give an additional filter point. So yeah, I hope this gives you a better understanding of how to create a scenario as well as how to set up a basic automation. Now, before we continue, I just want to remind, I had mentioned that there are different module types, from action modules to search modules to trigger modules, and some more advanced ones like the iterator or the aggregator. Now, when speaking about the other two types like search and trigger, I just want to expand on these a little bit further. So the search module types are, once again, looking for specific data, and it usually returns multiple items. But keep in mind, it does not actually modify the data. All it does is look through the data, right? And so when you're looking in the past, when you're looking through different search types, for example, Google Sheets, in the past, they did categorize it by search like so. But right now they changed the categorization. So the easiest way to sort of switch this up is just type in search, and you will see the different types of search modules that will exist. And this is just speaking on specifically Google Sheets right now, but there will probably be other search modules for other types of platforms. Perhaps maybe there's one for Telegram. We'll see. Nope. Maybe one for Twitter. For Twitter search. See, so search posts. And so depending on the app that you're using, you'll have different search modules there. And a search module is super useful for finding specific records or narrowing down a large data set to show only relevant information. And usually you would put these in between before a specific action, because you usually put these as an operation to then look through something and then send that information out into a new action module. So the case that I have here, what I did was I'm essentially pulling from the weather data. I'm going to be adding a row into the Google Sheets, and then based off of the data that was passed over, I'm routing that over into two different types of searches. One search will be trying to looking through to see if the temperature is less than or equal to 19, or if the status is clouds, right? And then, so that this search module is essentially taking that data that it's being pulled and added into the Google Sheets, and then seeing if it fits that sort of filter. So for many search modules, you'll have these sort of filters that are added into the configuration to be able to search through, to narrow down the search, right? To filter through the search. If you see at the bottom here, I put a limit. So this is the number of, I guess, bundles or set of information that you want to actually be able to pull from that search. And then my second search module here is now going to be looking at any off of the data that I'm being pulled, I want to search through any temperature data that is greater than or equal to 20. And then you can have a limit of 3 here. And so once again, these search modules don't actually take any action, but it's just working, processing in the back end and looking through the data and filtering it based off of the filters that I set. And then from here, you can then add an actionable and say, okay, I wanted to update the row. And you add your little row number. If it adheres to this search filter, right? And then from there, I will then say, if it does meet those search filters, then I will add a suggestion called take a jacket. And so that's the result ends up being something that looks like this, where previously I added rows into the Google Sheet. And then if it is below 20 or below the number of 20 that first search, then I'll add a suggestion here, right? If it's above 20, if it's at 20 or above, then it will add the second suggestion here, right? So this gives you a little bit of an idea of like how search can be used. Search is a really powerful module to use when you're really looking through the data of a given app. And then if you follow that with another action module, then it will be a great way to sort of filter through the information and take that action only if the conditions meet whatever filter you've set in your search. So that's just something to take note of when it comes to search modules. And then there are the other types of module called trigger module, which I've spoken about earlier. And once again, as a reminder, this is a module that starts at the very beginning and it sort of kickstarts your entire automation. And just to expand on this, when it comes to trigger modules, there are essentially 2 types of trigger modules. There are something called the polling trigger module, which essentially executes a scenario at a given interval. And this can be indicated from this little clock icon. But then there's also something called the instant trigger module, which executes a scenario instantly. So as soon as the data arrives into the app, then it will trigger instant. And you can often see this from, instead of a clock icon, it'll be a lightning icon. And now most trigger modules are pretty identifiable, but in case you're unclear whether it's a polling or a trigger or an instant module, you can just assume that any action or search module is considered to be a polling, and for the most part will be indicated with a clock icon. Right. So another way you can also check out if it's instant or not is even when you're looking in the app, you can just type in instant and you'll notice some of these things have these tags called instant ACID, right? So here I'll know that the watch event one is more of an instant module, right? If I were to add it, it's going to perform instantly, right? And let's see if Google Sheets has an instant one. Nope. Oh, well, no, yeah, he does. It has a perform a function. Right, and then this will be an instant module, an instant trigger. And then if you've noticed also, there are also tags called ACID. And so just in case you're wondering what this refers to, this essentially refers to if something has the tag ACID, it just means that the trigger will be voided if there is an error. So if there's an error, then it's just going to be voided and the trigger may not properly take account as an operation. Right, but if it does not have ACID, then even if there is an error, it may still execute the operation. So that's just something to take note of when it comes to search and trigger modules. So as you move along your scenario and build out different automations, and expand your modules, you'll begin to notice that there are different data types that show up. Right, so earlier in another video, I talked about how when you're inputting values, you can see this little screen here. And if you hover over specific items, you can see the data type that it is. So in this case, sunset is a date data type. A temperature would be a number data type. Then this would also be a number. You can also see some text, like cloudiness would be, this description would be a text data type, and so on and so on. But if you notice, the ones with these drop-down arrows are called collections. So collections in Make, it just refers to a set of unstructured object. So it just has multiple different objects. So in this case, geographic latitude is an object, geographic longitude is an object. It has a set of these. And then when it comes to arrays, another type that you may see later, but it's not really shown here, are arrays. And you're going to see this word pop up a lot across Make. For example, here you can see like with arrays, right? Or if I go into tools, you can see array aggregator. And so what arrays essentially means is it's a structured list of objects, right? So it contains multiple items of the same data type. So what I mean by this is that right now with collections, it might have a set of objects that are unstructured, and it just can only house objects. But within arrays, you can hold multiple collections within a single array. And then within those collections, you have then the objects, right? And so an array, it's not shown here, but an array usually looks like something like, let's say it would say coordinates, and then it usually has brackets like this, right? So once again, there's no array in this list, but if you do see it, and you do see it with like a drop-down menu, just make sure that if it does have like the brackets, it's most likely an array, or in other words, a list of structured objects together, right? And if it has this bracket, that means that let's say if you put in, let's say in this case, wind was an array, for example. Even though it's a collection, let's just say in this hypothetical case, it was. So if it was wind, then you have to put a number next to it to refer to the object. So in this case, wind 2 would refer to wind direction degrees. If I were to put wind 3, this would be wind gust, all right, and so on and so on. So this is it's just worth noting this terminology for later down the road. But going back to the key point that I was referring to is that sometimes when you're using Make, you're going to notice that, for example, the data points that come out, it shows up, like the formatting shows up differently than what you might want, right? So in this case, Make just automatically formats date types like this, right? So if you want to switch this up, this is where you leverage the power of functions. So whenever you input values, like how it's going to be output, you can notice this little box here, this little pop-up box that shows up. And at the top, you have a bunch of tabs that you can work with, right? So this is where you can access your functions. So you have functions for working with arrays, you have functions working with date and time, you have functions working with text, you have functions, mathematical functions, and then general functions. And so when it comes to general functions as a whole, this just really refers to essentially anything that you can just put like for example, this value equals that value, or this, I want to pull this and that, right? Or you can work with Boolean types, which is just true and false. But for now, we're just going to move forward into just explaining some of like the most basic ones, which are date and time, text, and math, right? So date and time in this case, you can just look at this and say, look, you have a bunch of functions you can add, but whether you want to add hours, add days, and you can just hover over them to get a better explanation of what it is. But a typical one that is pretty common is just formatting date. So you can just plug that in and you'll see the format here. You can also choose to just write these out yourself, like format date, and then you obviously have to follow the way that it is. And what you can do here, for example, is, let's say I want to format the current results, so I can plug in now. And what I always recommend is if you want to get the current date and time, then use the variable of now. And then from there, I want to format it in a cleaner method like this, right? So this is a typical method that you would see, like the date, the month, and the year. And so if I press OK now, and I just run this, that's going back to my thing, it's going to show up in a cleaner format. And you can do this in multiple ways. For example, in the example here that I'm just showing, I wrote date and time for Paris. So what I would do is, let's say I want to say format, and I will plug from the now, go to the date and time function. I'll choose now, drag and drop it in, drag and drop it in. And then I will say date, month, year. And then I will even say by hour and minutes. And then if I want to specify, for example, in Paris, I can say Europe/Paris. And then I have to always make sure to close the function with another parentheses. So in this case, this in the cell of C, in the column of C on my Google Sheets, it's going to be pulling the weather data and then giving it in the format of date, month, and year with the hour and the minutes, and then as well as telling in Europe and Paris. So if I press OK and I run this, you're going to see now it's going to show up like this, right? And of course, this is essentially working with date functions itself. Now, let's say you want to just adjust the text format that it is. So in this case, I've already created a sheet for where we can put text functions. And so I've just created these little column names. You don't really need to do it like this, but let's just to demonstrate to you the different ways that we can use these text functions. So I'll select that. I want the results to go straight into the text function sheet. And so here you'll notice the values change. So I can just delete this just because that was for date functions. And in this case, I can hit this and go into the little A and then find all of the different functions I can do. So in this case, let's say I want to make all of the letters uppercase, right? So then I can just look for this upper, and then I will say, the specific data point that I want to get from weather is the description, because this is an actual text function, right? So keep in mind, you want to make sure you choose a data type that is text, because you're working with the text function here. So I can work with status as well, but I'll work with description just because it seems like it could be longer. So then, voila, it's just done like that. And let's say if you want to just capitalize something, I can just hit the word capitalize. And what it will do, it will capitalize the very first letter. So I can find this description again, click it in. If I want to do start case, then that means every other letter, I can type this in, and every other letter of the new word will start off with a capital letter. And if I want to lowercase everything, I can do lower, and then description, add in the data that I want to plug. And then once I press OK and I run this, you're going to see, if I go back to my Google Sheets, boom, in my Google Sheets, it was able to transfer over the information in the way that I'm trying to format it. So very first one, I formatted it with the text function for its uppercasing everything. And the second one, it was I only uppercase the first letter. The third one, I'm uppercasing just the first letter of the next every new word, and then lowercasing everything for the fourth, right? And of course, as you can see, there are plenty of text functions you can work with, right? And to cover them all in a single video would probably be too much, but this just gives you an idea of how you can work with text functions to format the different text, the different data that is coming in from your main primary trigger app, and then the output format that you want, right? And you, once again, just as a reminder, if you hover over the specific function, you can see what it does, right? And you can see the format that it does. For the most part, for just general users, lowercase, start case, capitalize, upper, these are going to be the key ones just to note. But if you do start to leverage Make more extensively, then of course, getting familiar with the other text functions would be worth noting. Then there are mathematical functions you can place. So I've already selected the sheet where I want the input value to go into math functions, because I want the results to show up somewhere else. And so I can format the date here where I want format date, and I put in the time now, and then I just do date, year, and close it. So that's just the date itself. But when it comes to mathematical functions, what I can do is hit this little X1, and I can see all the different mathematical functions that I want to do. So I can format the number so that it comes out a specific way, or I can, for example, take an average. of something. So in this case, for this example, I'm taking an average. So what I'll take the average here will be, I will look at the temperatures and I'll look at the minimum and compare it, get the average of the minimum and the maximum, right? So there's a minimum average, minimum temperature, and a maximum temperature that is getting pulled from this weather app. And then so I want to just get the average number for that. So you're going to notice, maybe just in case if you're playing around on your own side, you're going to maybe notice that the weather app might not have the minimum maximum here. And so the reason for that is because in this case, I chose the get daily weather forecast. Because if you notice, if I just get the normal get current weather, this is only going to be pulling the current weather. So there's no range that I can play with. And which is why I created a get daily weather forecast, because then I can switch, I can select all the weather across all different periods. So there's going to be a bigger range that I can choose from to get an average, right? So that's just a slight difference here. Now going back to it, once again, get the average, press OK. If I hit this run once, then it'll play this. And then you're going to see all of the different averages is getting pulled. Right. Now you're going to notice, wait, well, perhaps why is it creating so many different cases? So the most likely scenario in this situation is because, once again, I'm pulling from all of these daily averages. If I only wanted to pull from 3, I probably would have just hit only 3 of them, and it would have probably just got the average of the minimum temperature and the maximum temperature for today or tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, right? Technically speaking, this could have worked with the original get current weather, but it would just be pulling from 1. It would just pull from 1. But this is just to give you guys an idea of how mathematical functions would work, right? And then if I wanted to format the number itself, I can hit format number, and then here I would give a number, for example, like let's say if you're working with big numbers and you want it to be formatted in a way where it's like the decimal points, you would put in the full number and then you would tell how many decimal points there would be. So if I would say 2 decimal points, and I would separate this by comma and dot. And what it's going to do is then it's going to format the number so it looks like that, right? So you see 2 decimal points, 1, 2, and then the first decimal point is going to be a comma, second decimal point is going to be a period. Technically speaking, I could do like that, like comma, comma, and then what that would end up creating is a result like that, right? But that gives you just a general idea of how a format number works. And so much in the same way as the text functions, there are plenty of math functions that you can work with, where you can look at the median, the maximum, the minimum, round up the numbers, sum up the numbers. And so if you've worked with any spreadsheets before, these are pretty similar to that idea.